What is up, guys? Doomwake here, and we are officially T-minus 2 days away from Phyrexia All Will Be One releasing to the digital clients, all of them. I'm not 100% sure exactly when the arena releases. I know that they did the, early access stuff over the weekend, but I know for a fact that Magic Online will have its release on Tuesday, which means that we're going to be playing with a lot of awesome and sick new brews over the next couple of weeks, and that's even better because there's a Pro Tour coming up in a couple of weeks as well, which I will be attending, so if you're going to be in Philly, be sure to come say hi. But yeah, I've been, I've been in the lab over the past week or so with new Phyrexia. With Phyrexia All Will Be One. I have about 20 or 25 decks. I'm not going to showcase to you every single one of them because that would be a really long video, but I'm going to show you my favorite ones and ones that I think are potentially really good. There's some really sick brews. There's maybe some ambitious ones too. But yeah, I'm really hyped for this set, and I cannot wait for it to come on Magic Online. So let's get started. All right, so first up, we have a pet project of mine. This is a card that I have not seen a lot of people talking about, and I'm not really sure why. This is Vat of Rebirth. So it basically triggers whenever an artifact or creature is put into a graveyard, you get a counter, and then you can remove 4 counters, spend some mana to reanimate a creature. So what are we doing with Vat of Rebirth? We have, first of all, it's very powerful with blood tokens. So blood tokens from Bloodtithe Harvester and Voldarin Epicure. The blood tokens are really sick because not only do they give you discard outlets for your fatty, which in this case is Ashen Rider, and or Titan of Industry, but they also trigger Vat of Rebirth because they're artifacts that are leaving the battlefield, so they kind of serve double duty. Then we also have Cauldron Familiar plus Witch's Oven, very powerful with Vat of Rebirth because every cat loop you go through, you're sacrificing the cat and the food, which is 2 oil counters, and it also buys you a lot of time because Vat can be a little expensive sometimes. We have some interaction with Thoughtseize and Fatal Push, pretty standard stuff there. We have Fable, which is another discard outlet for your fatties. Also, the backside can copy Ashen Rider, which is pretty absurd. And last but not least, the thing that I absolutely love about this deck is, and why we're choosing to go with Ashen Rider specifically as our 4 of reanimation target, is because of the synergy with Ashen Rider and Witch's Oven. Because what you can do is if you reanimate the Ashen Rider with Vat of Rebirth, you then can sacrifice it to Witch's Oven to get an additional permanent. You can blow up 2 of your opponent's lands. That's another counter on Vat of Rebirth. You can probably just go ahead and do it again because Vat of Rebirth, for some odd reason, does not exile the creature when it dies. A lot of effects like this will say, that creature gains if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead. That line of text is nowhere to be found in this card. I am really, really excited for this deck. This is one that I might be I cannot wait to play the most, and this is one that we're gonna spend quite a bit of time on this one. But yeah, that is the Vat of Rebirth Reanimator deck. All right, for this deck, I would like to shout out, I think it's Will Urker on Twitter. I believe that's their Twitter handle. Mind Splice Apparatus. So I first saw this deck in a tweet from Will, and he had like a very, very similar shell. I only changed a couple of cards from his list. But Mind Splice Apparatus is a card that reminds me a lot of Wilderness Reclamation. Now, with Reclamation, you got all of your mana back the turn that you played it, and you're not necessarily getting all of that mana from Apparatus. You have to cast multiple spells to get that much of a mana discount. But essentially what you're trying to do is, the core of this deck is find Apparatus, cast it on turn 3 with either Growth Spiral or Wolfwillow Haven. You have a lot of ways to find it. You have Consider, you have Supreme Will, you have Augury, which digs 3 cards to find Apparatus. So the jig is to cast Apparatus on your opponent's end step, untap, you immediately get a counter. And the really sick thing about specifically Experimental Augury that I've realized is Augury, when you have a counter on Apparatus, only costs 1 mana. And when you play the Augury, you then proliferate and put another counter on the Apparatus, which effectively means that it's a free spell because you're using a mana, but you're getting a counter on the Apparatus, which makes your next spell 1 mana cheaper. Now, we also have stuff like Behold the Multiverse, again, just more digging. This entire deck is just trying to dig for Apparatus, and then once you have Apparatus with 2 or 3 counters, you take a bunch of turns and kill your opponent with, either the Awaken from Part the Water Veil or the tokens from Alrund's Epiphany. This deck, I think, has the potential to be really, really good. Obviously, this is just the first draft. This is likely not what the final product is going to look like, but it is one that I think, if this card is good, this deck might be absurd. That's kind of the way that I look at it. If you think of stuff in the past like Wilderness Reclamation, that card was broken. Maybe not as good, but has the potential to be. One last note here: the Monumental Facade. Kind of a weird one. I almost wanted to play more copies of it, but basically what you're only playing it here so you can put a counter on apparatus. The awkward part is the turn that you play Facade, it's your land drop and you're tapping it to put a counter on it, so it's not really ramping you, it's mana neutral because you're tapping your land to add a counter to apparatus. And it doesn't cast Growth Spiral. So only 2 copies, but it, has the potential because you can also proliferate the Facade with Augury if you're, planning on playing a couple more turns, so... All right, we talked about ambition in the intro, and this is basically, if you look up the word ambition in the dictionary, you'll find an exact copy of this deck list. So when I first saw Capricious Hellraiser, it's a card that's, I think, a little bit more applicable in older formats that have access to Mishra's Baubles and fetch lands and things of that nature. But my Pioneer-focused brain immediately turned to a card that used to see some play back in like Turbo Dredge decks, but hasn't recently. It's Breaking and Entering. So it's hard to see, but Breaking is, you're only really ever going to cast the Breaking half, and it's blue-black, target player mills 8 cards. Now, you might think to yourself, Doomwake, how are you trying to cast a blue-black card on turn 2 and a triple red card on turn 3? And to that I would say, we'll just figure it out. So the mana base is pretty ambitious. Every single land in this deck, sans the one Takaduma, does tap for red mana. But the downside of that is you have less blue and black sources than you would like. So the mana base probably needs some work. But the goal of this deck is to turbo mill. So you have Otherworldly Gaze, Founding the Third Path, Breaking and Entering. All of those cards just, mill as many cards as possible. You also have Magma Opus, which is... does a couple of cool different things in this deck. It's mana ramp, so you can, we'll get to why mana ramp is important in a second. It puts a really powerful spell in your graveyard, which is something that you would actively want to cast with Hellraiser. And it, again, fills the graveyard. It helps to get to the 9 count. So the reason that mana ramp is good is because one of the more powerful interactions with Capricious Hellraiser is if you can cast it and then respond to the trigger with a Delve spell. That's why you see we're playing 3 Dig Through Time and 2 Murderous Cut. These are the best instant speed Delve spells that we have access to, because what you can do is if you have a full graveyard, you play Capricious Hellraiser, trigger on the stack, cast, say, a Dig Through Time, you delve the majority of your graveyard away that you don't want to get off Hellraiser, and then you're leaving yourself with, at the very minimum, a Dig Through Time, which probably a good one to cast off Hellraiser. Maybe also you have, like, an Opus and something else. So, that interaction I like a lot, and that's kind of the genesis of this deck. It's trying to be more of a mid-range deck. We have Thoughtseize, we have Fatal Push, we have Shieldred, but you have the ability to just have this like super fast this Hellraiser. I thought about maybe playing a couple of Time Walks, and I think that it might be possible that I should just not be playing these Shieldreds, or maybe playing less Shieldreds, maybe not playing the Kolaghan's Commands, and playing Alrund's Epiphany as another card to hit off Hellraiser. I'll have to experiment a little bit with that, but yeah, this one's a little ambitious. Might not be, exactly as good as I want it to be, but it's certainly going to be a fun one, and it's going to create a lot of good content. All right, and then we're just going to spend time on 2 decks here very quickly because these are just some small upgrades. First one is Boats. I, as you may have seen in the top 10 video, am very, very high on the Sword of Fortune Frontier. Any deck that is trying to be somewhat aggressive and has 8 copies of Elvish Mystic / Llanowar Elves should be playing this card. Now, this might be, the most obvious example. There's not a ton of aggressive elf decks in Pioneer, but I cannot stress to you how absurd this sword is. It makes all of your elves late game. Normally, top decking an elf on turn 4 or 5 is a disaster, but if you have a sword just sitting in play, any creature is an immediate threat. I think a lot of things, maybe a lot of people don't realize on first read of the sword, because a lot of cards that have said this in the past, like Exile 2, you can play them this turn. The land, you can play an additional land from your hand, so you don't need to hit a land off the sword. So, at the very minimum, the turn you equip, you do have to spend 2 mana, so you're not likely to be able to hit 2 spells off of it. But if you say hit a land and a 2-drop, you're golden. Or just, if you hit 2 spells, you can at least play a land from your hand to be able to cast one of those 2 spells. So I think this card's an immediate 3-of in Boats. I'm going to start with 3. It's possible maybe 2 is the correct number, but I'm going to start with 3 and see how that goes. And then the other new card here, Luca Bound to Ruin. I have no idea how good this card is, but I've heard one of my friends was talking about it, and he seems pretty high on it, so I'm going to take his word for it. I'm going to try a couple copies, see how it plays out. Maybe 1 is the correct number, maybe none is the correct number. But it does some cool things. The -4, you do have a lot of just big doofuses in your deck, like Sky Siren has 6 power, Lovestruck has 5 power, so the -4 is pretty good. It does kind of protect itself. It makes a 3/3, and then just being able to, add a little bit more mana helps with your Giganta turns, so keep that in mind. But yeah, that is the updates for boats. Then the other deck that I think gets some pretty, again, minor upgrades, but they're actually maybe a little bit more major in the grand scheme of things. So the Enchanties deck, this is Enigmatic Fires. Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines, is absurd in this deck, and we'll talk about... So I'm playing 2 copies. You might think that because we're playing Incarnation, we only need to play 1 to search for. I kind of want to play 3 and potentially even 4 copies, because naturally drawing this card is so absurd. Imagine a scenario where you have, like, your normal best draw, which in, turn 4 fires Incarnation. If you have an Elesh Norn in your hand, you can then the next turn go Elesh Norn, play something else, which you get to double up on the trigger for, and then whatever you search off of Incarnation, you immediately get that double trigger. Now, Elesh Norn is a good card to search for, however, you get a lot less value out of it the turn that you're searching for it, because you have to get it on your opponent's end step, and you can't do anything until your next turn, so that's assuming it even survives, which against Rakdos and Dreadbore, it's probably not going to, which is why naturally drawing it means that you get to play it, immediately get like a ton of value out of it, and then even if they kill it, who cares, you already got your money out, money on the way out the door. The other new card here is Atraxa. Now, these decks typically did not play 3 7-drops, but because of how good Elesh Norn is with the 7-drops, I think the third one is worth it. Like, can you imagine an Elesh Norn in play and having a double Atraxa trigger? You just put 10 cards in your hand or something, no big deal. So I want to try Atraxa. It's also just a massive, huge stabilizing, life-linking body, so in combination with just being able to protect yourself, gaining a ton of life, I think I'm going to start with 1 copy of Atraxa and see how that goes. But yeah, just some minor updates to those 2 decks. Now that we've gone over some minor upgrades, let's talk about pretty much a brand new archetype here, and this is the deck that I think the people have been asking for me the most. So this is my initial list. Now, this actually mostly came from, I think it was Da Vinci MTG on Twitter. That's where I got most of the inspiration. I think I only changed a few cards, if any. But basically, Cacophony Scamp is super powerful because... imagine a scenario where you go turn 1 Cacophony Scamp, and then turn 2 you have Sigarda's Aid plus Colossus Hammer. So then on turn 2 you play your Sigarda's Aid, attack with Cacophony Scamp, put a hammer on it. Then your opponent takes 11 damage from combat, and then the Cacophony Scamp has an ability where it can sacrifice it to sacrifice it to proliferate, and then when it dies, you dome them for another 11. That's a turn 2 kill. Maybe Magical Christmas Land, maybe not. Maybe it's going to happen more often than you think. But the fact that this deck can do that is pretty scary. And then even past the turn 2, absurd busted kills, you have a lot of consistency. Like, it's not quite as good as Modern Hammer because you don't have a Stoneforge Mystic, but you have Fighter Class, which searches for Colossus Hammer. You have a couple of Open the Armories, which also searches Colossus Hammer. Then that opens up a small equipment package, which you have Lion Sash, a Shadow Spear, and 1 Rabbit Battery. Then you also have a lot of protection. So the other new card here is Skrelv Defector Might, which allows you to, when you're going for a hammer, if you have an active Skrelv, you can protect your creature from a removal spell. You also have Loren's Escape, another protection spell. And then you'll notice that we have a decent number of warrior creature types. We have Fireblade Charger, which is effectively another copy of Cacophony Scamp, the Scamp itself, and then Season Howlblade. All of those are warriors, which allow us to play Resolute Strike, which is another way to equip your hammer for free, essentially, well, for 1 mana. So I think we finally have all of the tools to make a really good Pioneer Hammer deck. I have a couple of different builds. I have one that is more cat-focused, which we'll look at that in a quick second. We'll just go over the differences. And then I have one that I'm not a huge fan of that's like higher up the curve with Astor. That one we need to spend a little bit more time on. But I think the Hammer Time archetype is going to be so good when the new set comes out. Cacophony Scamp is just such a sick card for this deck, and another deck that I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on. Then just for completion's sake, this is the cat version. So this version, I think it was Claudio on Twitter, Claudio MTG, who posted a list very similar to this. Again, I changed a couple of cards. I think he wasn't playing Cacophony Scamp, but even though this version does not have the Resolute Strike, I still think Cacophony Scamp is worth it. But we're building this one around Kemba. Now, Kemba is powerful because even if it's your only cat, you can still play it and equip a hammer to it. But it also gets a lot better if you play more cats. So we have a Doran Pouncer, which is a 2-mana 1/1 double strike, also a cat. And then I think, laughably, you're going to think this is funny, but this is honestly the best one, Sacred Cat. And the reason this one's so good is, imagine you're playing against Rakdos, and you go, you have a Kemba in play, and they tap out, and you go, I don't know, Colossus Hammer, then Sacred Cat, put the hammer on it, and then they Fatal Push your Sacred Cat, and now your hammer's just kind of chilling there. Well, you could just embalm the Sacred Cat and then get another 11/11, which also has lifelink. So I think this might be the best reason to play the cat version alongside Kemba. The rest of the deck, very similar. We have the Lorenz Escapes, the Sigarda Sages, the Skrelves. Most of the stuff is pretty similar, but that's like the cat-focused version of Hammer Time. I will spend a little bit of time on this. This one also has Nahiri. The other version could play Nahiri, but I think the other version is trying to be a little bit more faster, and that's why this one has Nahiri, the other one doesn't. So keep that in mind. But yeah, we'll spend a little bit of time on this one too. All right, Bloated Contaminator, another card that was on my top 10 list. I have two different versions of scales. This one has the 8 copies of Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, and Llanowar Elves. The other version has Pelt Collector and Experiment one. I'm not really a big fan of that one. I think I like this one more because, trying to... Bloated Contaminator is a little bit better when you are able to put more stuff onto the battlefield, and that's what the elves allow you to do. They just allow you to go a little bit wider and put more stuff. But this is essentially just Hardened Scales. We have the 4 Hardened Scales, the 4 Conclave Mentors, which essentially doubles up as your Hardened Scales. Then you have the stuff that puts counters, which is Quirion Beastcaller, a card that I was pretty high on when Dominaria came out, but it didn't really do that much. We experimented before a little bit with Scales, but I think Contaminator is a massive upgrade to this deck. Then we have also Luminarch Aspirant, put more counters, Nissa, Voice of Zendikar counters on your whole team, Rishkar, and then Dramoka's Command, and then the kind of thing the reason I love this card so much is 4/4 Trample is just really good stat line for 3 mana, and it even has Toxic, which could matter, maybe, against stuff like Angels, for example, although I guess you're not really outsizing them that much. I don't know, maybe that doesn't matter, but just the fact that 4/4 Trample for 3 and then Proliferate on a hit trigger, that's a lot of stats. And then you could even you could imagine some of the draws that involve Aspirant, Beastcaller, Nissa, and then you start proliferating. You can also put counters on Nissa, which gets you faster to the ultimate. So a lot of cool stuff going on here. I'm going to spend a little bit of time with Scales. There's one other version that I want to go over pretty briefly here. This is a list that came from Claudia. This also has Bloated Contaminator. It's Scales, but it's monogreen, and the reason you would want to be monogreen is so you can play a card like Nykthos. So you'll see here, this version is a lot more devotion focused. We have 8 double green 2-drops. Barkhide Troll works pretty well with Proliferate, again, Bloated Contaminator, and then also the Hardened Scales aspect of it. You have the mana ramp, you have stuff like Ranger Class, which you can also proliferate with Contaminator, very, very powerful. You'll still see the Nissas and the Rishkars, and then because we're playing Nykthos, a card like Vivian Arcbow Ranger gets a lot more appealing. You can sideboard, any number of creatures, the Ulamogs, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, this is just kind of, just for completion's sake, another version of Scales. I don't know if I like this one as much because it doesn't have, because you're playing one color, you can't play the second copy of Hardened Scales in Conclave Mentor. But this one might be a little bit more just at a solid non-Scales game plan. The other one's a little bit more all in on Scales. So we'll try both. We'll see how they go. Not sure which one I like better though. Then another Tivar deck. This is, I think, the Tivar deck that I might be the most excited for. This is Elves. So we have Tivar. So this was number 1 on my top 10 list for those of you who missed that. And Tivar is super powerful in this deck for the main reason is because it makes all of your mana creatures, which we're playing a ton of, have haste and tap for mana the turn they enter the battlefield. So, if you have extra Llanowar Elves in hand that you're just kind of just chilling in your hand, if you have Tivar, you can just play all of them because you play an elf, tap it for mana, play an elf, tap it for mana, go on, so on and so forth. It's also incredibly powerful with Circle of Dreams Druid, card that add a green for each creature you control. So you can imagine situations where, you know, turn Tivar on maybe turn 2 or turn 3, untap an elf, play all the other 1-drops in your hand because they all have haste, and then you have 4 or 5 creatures in play. You play Circle, tap it for 4 or 5, Tivar, and then immediately untap the Circle. Now you have 8 or 10 mana in your pool. You could see where we're going from there. You know, Leaf Crown Visionary. If you have more elves, you can draw more cards that way. You have Collected Company, which can find more Circles, which then tap for mana because you already have Tivar in play. It just gets out of control. I'm going to be spending a lot of time with this deck. I think it's probably right to play 4 Tivar. I just haven't figured out what I want to cut yet. Maybe the 3rd Dwinnen's Elite, maybe the 2nd Court of Calling. But yeah, this one I'm going to be spending a lot of time on, because I think this is probably the best Tivar shell, but I got one more that I want to show you. Here's the other Tivar deck. This one I got from Claudio. Again, Claudio on Twitter. I changed a couple of cards. I think he had less copies of... I think he had less Glasspool Mimic / Renegade Rallier. But the idea behind this deck is Tivar is a card that makes Prime Speaker Vannifar really, really powerful, because before, we'll go through the combo line in a second, but before with these Prime Speaker Vannifar combo decks, your line was play Vannifar and cross your fingers. Now if you have Tivar in play, you play Vannifar and they just die on the spot. So, but the combo, for those of you who are not familiar with this, is if you have Prime Speaker and any 1-drop in play, doesn't matter which one, just any 1-drop, could be any creature. Well, I guess it has to be a 1-drop. So you sacrifice the 1-drop, you get Corridor Monitor. Corridor Monitor then untaps your Prime Speaker Vannifar. Then you go Prime Speaker, sack Corridor Monitor, go into Extraction Specialist. Extraction Specialist trigger, get back Corridor Monitor, untap Prime Speaker Vannifar. Now you have an untapped Prime Speaker, a Specialist, and a Monitor. You then tap the Vannifar, sack the Monitor, get another Specialist, bring back Monitor, untap Vannifar. You see where I'm going with this. You go through all 4 Specialists, then after you've gone through those, you go through 3 Glasspool Mimic, which effectively can do the same thing because you can copy Extraction Specialist, and then you can go through 2 Ralliers, which do the same thing because they revolt, get a permanent back, which gets back the Monitor. So now you have all of these 3-power creatures on the battlefield. Then on your last activation, you sacrifice the Monitor, get Keldon Strike Team, which gives all of your things haste, and you attack your opponent. So the other really nice thing that Tivar does in this deck is Fauna Shaman. So specifically, the reason that untapping Fauna Shaman is so good is because you can activate Fauna Shaman to get a Skrelv. You can then play Skrelv, which happens to have haste. You can activate it the turn that you play it. And so basically you can go like Fauna Shaman, get Skrelv, untap, get a Vannifar, and now you just have, you have built-in protection because you have the Skrelv. They have to kill it. If you play Skrelv before you play Vannifar, now you have the Skrelv to protect Vannifar. So a really sick Tivar deck, and yeah, I'm pretty excited for this one. Maybe not quite as much as Elves, but we will definitely spend some time on this one. All right, last one before I let you get out of here. So again, this one might be a little ambitious. This is another deck that I shamelessly stole from Will Urker. If you're not following them on Twitter, definitely go drop them a follow. All the people that I shouted out today, DaVinci MTG, Will Urker, Claudio, go drop them all follows. I got a lot of inspiration for a lot of my decks from them, so definitely go check them out. But this one comes from Will, and this is Pyre of Heroes Phyrexian. You're maybe used to seeing Pyre of Heroes with humans or some other normal, common tribe. But we get a lot of Phyrexian creature support, specifically this one right here on your screen, Malcator. Is that how you say it? Malcator? Basically, 1/1 that makes a 3/3 when it comes into play. Now, you're not really ever going to trigger the second ability, but just the reason this card is so good is because of how well it plays with Pyre. You just put it into play. When you sacrifice the Malcator to go up the chain, you just have a free 3/3 lying around. So this deck does some really cool stuff. We also got Malcator's Watcher, which is 2-mana 1/1 flying Phyrexian. When it dies, draw a card. So another good thing to sacrifice to Pyre of Heroes to go up the chain. We have and then we have Annex Sentry, which is a removal spell that we can pod in or Pyre into, which is really sick. And then up the curve, we have, again, Master Splicer, very similar to it's just a 4-mana version of Malcator, effectively. Gixian Puppeteer, which we can, if I can highlight this, we can do some cool stuff because we have the Malcator's Watcher to draw additional cards, along with Evangel of Synthesis to draw more cards. You can actually trigger Puppeteer quite effectively, pretty with regularity in this deck. And then you're going up to Shieldred. You have Urtai Resurrected, which helps you remove creatures. And then as your 5 drops, we have a couple more new cards here. Elesh Norn, which we've seen before, but you get to double up triggers with stuff like Malcator, double up Sentry triggers, you double up Evangel triggers, so you get some really sick turns with Elesh Norn. We have Drivnod, I think that's how you say that. But it says if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So we also have, it doubles up on Malagator's Watcher, but we can also double up Massacre Worm. So you can imagine if you have Elesh Norn in play and you put Massacre Worm onto the battlefield, you get 2 enter the battlefield triggers. Or if you have Drivnod into play and you Massacre Worm all of your opponent's stuff, they lose 4 life for each creature that died. So you can get some pretty absurd turns when you're going all the way up the chain. This deck looks super sweet, and I cannot wait to play it. Just kind of rounding it out the deck, we have Skrelv, which is another Phyrexian creature, helps start the chain, protect your other, silver bullets. You have Soulless Jailer, which doesn't affect you at all. It doesn't affect Pyre of Heroes, so that's pretty sick. And then last but not least, you have Kiora, which untaps the Pyre of Heroes. So this deck looks super sick, and this one might be one that I'm the most excited to play. But that was it for me for today. We went over a lot of decks. That's just scratching the surface. That's probably not even half of the decks that I've made. This set is incredible. I'm super, super excited to start playing with the new set. If you made it to the end of the video, please be sure to let me know in the comment section below what you're most excited for from the new set. Which one of these brews today that you want to see the most, and in the next couple of days when we start playing, I cannot wait to upload some videos with the new set. So with that, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace!